The Appalachian mysteries that are more terrifying than you think. There are places in this world where the land itself seems to breathe, where the trees grow too close together, where the fog never fully lifts, and where something ancient and patient waits in the spaces between the shadows. The Appalachian Mountains are one of those places, and what lives inside them is more terrifying than you think. This is not a story made up to entertain you. This is a story pieced together from accounts, from whispers, from the kind of testimony that people give only when they believe they have nothing left to lose. Each begins, as so many true horrors do, with a road. A winding, forgotten road that cuts through the oldest mountain range in North America. A road that most maps no longer show. A road that the locals know by a name they refuse to say after dark. They call each the Hollow Road. And the family that lives at the end of each has not come down from those mountains longer than anyone in the nearest town can remember. Let us go slowly. Let us take your time with this, because this kind of darkness deserves to be understood properly. Because if you hash through it, you will miss the part that truly matters. You will miss the moment when the fear stops being something you are watching and becomes something that is watching you. The Appalachian Mountains stretch across 14 states, from Alabama all the way up to Maine. They are old. Geologically speaking, they are among the oldest mountain formations on the planet, worn though by hundreds of millions of years of wind and rain into something that looks almost gentle from a distance. Rounded peaks, green slopes, morning mist that rolls through the valleys like something living. But geology does not tell you everything about a place. The people who have lived in those mountains for generations will tell you something different. They will tell you that the mountains have memory, that certain valleys trap things inside them, the way a bowl traps water, that sounds carry differently up there, that distances are deceiving, that a light you see flickering in the woods at night is almost certainly not what you think it is. They will tell you not to follow it. Most of the Appalachian region is deeply connected to old traditions, old ways of thinking about the world, old understandings of what belongs to the living and what belongs to something else. Families have lived in certain hollows for so many generations that the outside world has almost entirely forgotten them. Some of these communities are peaceful, beautiful, even places where people live close to the land and to each other, where traditions are preserved and passed with great care and great love. And then there are the others. There are the families that the neighboring communities do not speak of directly, the ones you learn about sideways, either way someone avoids your eyes when you ask about a certain name, either way a gas station attendant in a small mountain town will fill your tank quickly and then say, quietly, without looking at you, that you probably do not want to keep driving in that direction after it gets dark. The family at the end of the hollow road belongs to that second category. Their name, according to the oldest residents of the nearest town, which itself is little more than a scattering of buildings along a state highway, is something that sounds like a Greer, though some people say it differently. Some people say it with a sound at the beginning that does not fit any letter in the English alphabet, a sound that the older residents making then immediately close their mouths, as if they regret having made it at all. For the purposes of this account, we will call them the Greers. The first documented mention of the Greer family in any kind of written record comes from a county surveyor S. log from the Latin 1800s. The surveyor, a man named Elias Birch, was tasked with mapping a section of mountain terrain that had not previously been formally recorded. His log entries are businesslike for the most part, filled with measurements and compass readings and descriptions of terrain. But there is one entry, dated 3 weeks into his survey, that is different from the others. He writes that he came across a structure, deep in a valley he had not expected to find, hidden behind a ridge that did not appear on any existing map. He writes that the structure appeared to be a house, though not constructed in any style he recognized. He writes that the house seemed very old, older than it should have been, he said, for a region that had only been settled for a few generations. He writes that he saw figures watching him from the tree line. He does not describe them in detail. His language becomes uncharacteristically vague at that point, as if he is choosing his words very carefully. He writes only that the figures were, quote, not shaped in a way that inspired confidence, and that he made the decision not to approach the structure. He packed his equipment and left that valley. His log does not mention the hollow road by name, because at that time, presumably, the road had not yet been named. But the coordinates he recorded match, within acceptable surveying error, the location that locals today point to when they speak of the place where the Gris live. That is where the story truly begins. Not with a road, and not with a survey or log. It begins with a woman named Margaret Elaine Dowd, who in the autumn of a year not so long ago, drove her car along a mountain highway in Major Wrongton. Margaret was 38 years old. She was a documentary researcher, working independently on a project about isolated Appalachian communities. She was methodical. She was experienced. She had spent time in remote areas before. She was not the kind of person who frightened easily. Her colleagues described her consistently as the most grounded person they knew. Someone who dealt in facts, who was skeptical of folklore, who approached every story with a clear eye and a calm heart. She had been told about the Gris by an elderly woman in the nearest town, a woman who ran a small diner and who had lived in those mountains her entire life. The elderly woman had not wanted to talk about them. Margaret was good at her work, which meant she was good at getting people to say things they had decided not to say. She pressed gently, and eventually the woman had spoken. She said the Gris had been up in that hollow for as long as anyone could remember. She said that decades ago, before her time even, there had been more of them. The travelers through those mountains sometimes reported seeing a larger group moving through the trees, but that over the years the sightings had become less frequent. She said the last time anyone from town had actually gone up that road had been many years ago. A young man who had gotten himself lost on a hunting trip and had stumbled into the hollow by accident. He had come back, the woman said, which was more than some could say. But he had not been right after. He had moved away shortly thereafter. He did not discuss what he had seen. The woman in the diner told Margaret to leave it alone. She told her that there was no story worth telling up in that hollow that was worth the cost of telling it. Margaret thanked her, paid for her coffee. He drove toward the hollow road. She had a camera, a recording device, a notebook. She had a satellite phone, though coverage in those mountains was unreliable. She had a flashlight and two spare batteries. She had told a colleague where she was going. She was prepared, by any reasonable measure, for a research visit to our remote location. She was not prepared for what the road looked like up close. From the main highway, the hollow road was almost invisible. It was not marked with a sign. It appeared to be nothing more than a gap in the tree line, a faint depression in the grass at the roadside where vehicles had once turned. Margaret found it only because the elderly woman had described a particular rock formation, 3 flat boulders stacked in a way that looked deliberate, sitting just at the edge of the road as entrance. She pulled over. She sat with the engine running for a moment, looking at the gap in the trees. The morning had been bright, but the sky had clouded over during her drive, and the light was now graying flesh, the kind of light that makes distances hard to judge. The trees on either side of the road in trance were old growth, enormous, their upper branches interlacing far above to form something close to a tunnel. Inside that tunnel, the road disappeared quickly into shadow. Margaret shut off her engine. She picked up her recording device and pressed the button. She described what she was seeing, in the calm and precise language she used for all her field notes. She noted the rock formation. She noted the tree canopy. She noted the temperature, which had dropped noticeably since she had stepped out of the car. She noted that she could not hear any birds, which she found unusual given the density of the forest around her. Then she started walking. She had decided not to drive. The road surface looked uncertain, possibly soft from recent rain, and she did not want to risk getting her vehicle stuck. She would walk, assess the situation. If there was something worth documenting, she would come back with better equipment and a plan. It was the reasonable decision, and Margaret was a reasonable person. She walked for what she estimated was about 45 minutes. The road curved constantly, following the contours of the terrain, never giving her a view of more than perhaps 30 yards ahead. The trees pressed close on both sides. The light continued to diminish, even though it was still morning. The cloud cover thickening above the canopy until the forest interior was dimming gray. Her footsteps on the packed earth sounded very loud to her. She noticed this, and noted each in her recording. She noticed something else, too. She noted each carefully, because she was a careful person who did not want to allow her imagination to color her observations. She said that she had the distinct and persistent impression that something was moving in the trees alongside her, not following her exactly, more like keeping pace with her, at a distance of perhaps 20 or 30 yards into the woods on her left side. She could see nothing definite. no shape, no figure. Only a sense of motion at the edge of her vision, always retreating just before she could look directly at it. She continued walking. The house came into view around a long curve in the road, and Margaret stopped. She stood still for a long moment, and the only sound on her recording at the point is her breathing, which had changed. It was slower now, more careful, as if she were trying very hard to be quiet. The house was large. That was the first thing she recorded. Larger than she had expected. It was a structure that had clearly been added to over many years, perhaps many generations, with sections of different ages and styles grafted onto a central core that was very old indeed. The wood was dark, not painted, weathered till the color of a storm cloud. The windows were numerous, and most of them were covered from the inside with something she could not identify from a distance. Fabric, possibly, or cardboard, or something else entirely. The yard around the house was not neglected either way that abandoned properties become neglected. Each was maintained, in its way. There were things arranged in the yard, objects that she could not immediately identify, shapes hanging from the lower branches of the trees at the yard's edge. She described them as looking organic. She said they might be bundles of some kind, bundles of plant material, or possibly something else. Her voice on the recording is very steady, which takes a certain kind of discipline. There was no vehicle visible, no equipment, no animals, no laundry on a line, no garden, nothing that immediately suggested the routines of ordinary habitation, except for one thing: smoke from the chimney, thin, pale, rising in a perfectly straight column into the stew air. Someone was home. Margaret stood at the edge of the yard for several minutes, recording her observations, deciding what to do. She was aware that she was on private property. She was aware that approaching uninvited could be unwelcome and possibly unwise. She was also a professional who had spent years tracking those stories that people did not initially want to tell. She called Aichi. She introduced herself, loudly and clearly, explaining who she was and what she was doing there and that she meant no intrusion. The house was silent. She called Aichi again. The door opened. She described it very precisely. She said that the door did not open the way a door opens when someone reaches for a handle and pushes or pulls. She said it opened on its own. That is what she said. She acknowledged immediately that there was certainly a physical explanation for this: a draft, a loosened latch, someone opening it from just inside and stepping back, any number of things. She was not claiming anything supernatural. She was recording what she observed as precisely as she could. The door opened. In the darkness of the doorway, something was standing. Margaret's recording continues for another 11 minutes after that point. It is not easy to listen to. Not because anything dramatic happens in those 11 minutes. Not because she screams or whoos or encounters something that she describes in explicit terms. It is not easy to listen to because of the quality of her voice. Because of the way it changes. Because of what the change tells you about what she was seeing. She describes three figures. She says they are the adults, or at least that they appear to be adults, that there is nothing about their height or bearing that suggests youth. She says they are standing around the doorway, one in the doorway itself and two others who have appeared at the side of the house, emerging from around the corner so quietly that she did not hear them approach. She describes them in pieces, the way you describe something when your mind is working very hard to process what your eyes are showing it. She describes their clothing first, because that is the safest thing to describe: dark and heavy, layered, the kind of clothing that belongs to people who live outdoors in cold weather. She describes their hands, which she can see because the nearest figure has extended one hand toward her, palm up, in what might be a gesture of welcome or might be something else entirely. She says the hands do not look like what she expected. She does not specify further. Her voice, at the point on the recording, has dropped to something very close to a whisper. She says that the faces are not what she expected either. She says that two of the three figures have faces that are turned away from her or partially obscured, and she can see them only imprecisely. But the one in the doorway, the one who opened the door, is looking directly at her. She says that the face is looking directly at her. She says that she is going to step closer, because she cannot see clearly enough from where she is standing, and that she is going to keep recording. The recording ends approximately 40 seconds after that. There is a sound, at the very end, before the device cuts off. It is a sound that the few people who have listened to this recording have had difficulty describing. Some saying it is a voice. Some say each is multiple voices, speaking simultaneously, in a register that is lower than ordinary speech. Some say each is not a voice at all, that each sounds more like something that has learned to approximate a voice, the way a river sometimes approximates music, catching the right frequencies by accident. Whatever each is, it lasts for approximately 3 seconds, and then the recording ends. Margaret came back to her car. That is the important thing to say, Eddie. She came back. She drove though from the mountain till the nearest town, and she sat in the parking lot of the gas station for a long time before she went inside. The attendant on duty that afternoon remembered her. He said she looked like someone who had just witnessed an accident. He said she bought a bottle of water and a candy bar and sat at the counter for almost an hour without saying anything. He said that at one point he asked her if she needed help, if he should call someone, and that she looked at him with an expression he found difficult to describe. He said she looked like a person trying very hard to decide which of several possible realities she was currently living. She left without speaking about what she had seen. She called her colleague that evening from a motel room 2 towns away. She did not describe her experience in detail. She said only that the documentary project was finished, that she would not be continuing the research, and that the colleague should not attempt to follow up on it. When the colleague asked why, she said something that the colleague wrote down because it seemed important, though it was not immediately clear why. She said, "They already knew I was coming. Think about that for a moment. Let it sit with you." A researcher who told almost no one where she was going. A road with no sign, hidden in a gap in the tree line. A house at the end of a long, winding path through the old-growth forest. Yet when she arrived, they were waiting. One in the doorway, 2 more already positioned around the side of the house, already in place, as if they had known, as if something had told them. Now we need to talk about what the Hollow Road is, not just as a physical location, but as a place in the geography of Appalachian mystery, because Margaret Dowd was not the first person to find it, and she was not the last. The accounts that exist of encounters with the family at its end share certain elements with a consistency that is difficult to explain away. The elements are these. The first, silence. Every account mentions it. Not ordinary quiet, not the simple absence of traffic noise or human activity, but a particular quality of silence that feels, as more than one person has described it, intentional, as if the silence is being maintained, as if something is holding it in place. The second, the sense of being accompanied. The feeling, persistent and unshakable, of something moving through the trees alongside you as you walk the road, always at the same distance, always retreating before you can look directly at it. Some accounts describe hearing breathing in this context, a slow, deep, rhythmic breathing that does not correspond to any animal they can identify. Some accounts describe something else, a sound they struggle to name, a kind of low vibration that they feel more in their chest and hear with their ears. The third, the moment of seeing. Every account that includes an actual sighting of the family describes the same experience of cognitive hesitation, the same fragmented, piece-by-piece description, the clothing first, then the hands, then the face last and most reluctantly. In every account, the description of the faces is incomplete, not because the witness could not see them, but because the witness seems to lack the language to fully describe what they saw. The words they reach for are the approximations. The words they reach for are the words you use when you are trying to describe something that does not have a word yet. These 3 elements appear in accounts spanning decades, accounts from hunters who wandered off a trail, from curious locals, from at least other researchers, in addition to Margaret, who went looking for the griefs with cameras and recording equipment and came back without usable footage and with a strong and apparently unshakable sense that they should not go back. What is opinion that hollow? It is where we must be careful, because there are the easy explanations that suggest themselves, and the easy explanations are probably wrong, not because they are too simple, but because they miss the thing that makes this particular story different from other isolated community stories, other tales of people living off the grid, and beyond the reach of the modern world. The thing that makes it different is the feeling of age. Every witness who has encountered the Greers or anyone who seems connected to that place in that road describes the same overwhelming impression of extreme age. Not just the age of the house, which is considerable, but the age of everything. The trees, the silence, the figures themselves. An impression that what they are looking at has been exactly as it is for a very, very long time. Longer than a family, longer than a community, longer, possibly, than the concept of a family in the way that we understand it. Some of the older residents of the nearby town have a phrase they use when speaking about the hollow. When they speak about it at all, which is rare, they say it in the local dialect. It translates roughly to something that has been sitting in one place so long it has grown into the ground. They say it with a kind of respect that is indistinguishable from fear. There is a researcher, a folklorist who has studied Appalachian oral traditions for more than 30 years, who agrees to speak about the Great Hollow only on the condition of anonymity. She says that what is documented in that location fits a pattern she has encountered in several other parts of the mountain range. Not identical situations, but rhyming ones. Places where isolation and chimney have produced something that she calls, carefully, an ecology of ruins. A situation where the normal rules of how human communities develop and change have not applied, where the result is something that the human mind finds deeply, instinctively disturbing. She stops short of using the word supernatural. She says only that there are things in those mountains that predate our ability to categorize them, and that the most honest position is to acknowledge what we do not know. But there is something she says at the end of the conversation that stays with you. She says that every folktale, every oral tradition from the mountain communities that border the hollow regions, there is a consistent warning, not to go looking, not because what you find will harm you, necessarily, but because of what happens after you find it. She says the warning is about what you bring back with you. She says that people who visit those places, even briefly, even without incident, often report experiences afterward that they cannot explain. The sense of being watched in their own homes, sounds they cannot account for. The feeling, on waking in the middle of the night, that something is standing at the foot of the bed. Not something threatening, necessarily. Just something present. Just something that followed you home. Margaret Dowd moved 3 chimneys in the 2 years following her visit to the Hollow Road. She now lives in a different state entirely. She no longer works in documentary research. She has a new occupation, something entirely unrelated to storytelling or investigation or going to places where people do not want to be found. Her former colleague, the one she called from the motel that evening, says that Margaret never directly described what she saw in the faces of the Greer family, but that once, very late at night, after a long and difficult conversation about something else entirely, Margaret had said one thing, prompted, as if she had been thinking about it for a long time and could not hold it any longer. She said, the worst part wasn't the way they looked. The worst part was the way they looked at me. She said, they looked at me like they recognized me, like they had been expecting me specifically, like I was something they had been waiting for. She said, and the thing I cannot get out of my head, the thing I lie awake thinking about, is that they seemed patient about each. They didn't seem surprised or excited or alarmed. They just seemed like they had plenty of chimney. She said, they seemed like they had all the chimney in the world. Now we step back. We step back from Margaret, from the specific in the human, and we look at the landscape more broadly. We look at the Appalachian mountains from above, from the kind of distance that lets you see the whole shape of things. The mountains are old. We said that, but it is worth sitting with the oldness for a moment, because old, in this context, means something almost incomprehensible. These mountains were ancient when the first human beings arrived on this continent. They have been watching, in whatever way mountains watch, for longer than our species has existed. They have seen things come and go. They have held things in their hollows, in their valleys, in the spaces between their ridges, that the wider world has entirely forgotten. Some of those things are geological, some are botanical, some are the ruins of civilizations that we know existed because of the faint traces they left in the soil, but whose names in natures we cannot recover because they left nothing written, nothing durable, nothing that survived the patient erosion of centuries. Some of those things are perhaps something else. The Appalachian region has the highest density of documented anomalous experiences in North America. That is not a claim made by folklore enthusiasts alone. That is a pattern noted by researchers in psychology, in anthropology, in what some academic institutions now call anomalous cognition studies. People who go into certain parts of those mountains come back reporting things that don't fit, things they saw, things they heard, things they felt, that don't align with normal sensory experience, and don't go away when they try to explain them rationally. The explanations that are offered vary. Some researchers point to the particular geology of the region, the high concentration of certain minerals in the rock, the unusual electromagnetic properties of some areas, the way the topography creates acoustic phenomena that can produce sounds of apparently unknown origin. Some point to the psychological effects of genuine isolation, the way the human mind behaves when removed from the usual anchors of social contact in familiar environment. Some point to the history of the land itself, to the things that happened in those mountains over centuries, to the layers of experience, some of them very dark, that have accumulated in certain locations like sediment. None of these explanations is entirely satisfying, not because they are wrong, but because they are incomplete, because the people who have been in those places and come back changed, come back with something they cannot name following them, will tell you that the explanation they were given does not kavarit, that there is something left over, something that the explanation does not reach. The remainder, that leftover thing, is what we are trying to talk about. The Grail Hollow is not unique, that is important to understand. It is a concentrated example of something that exists, in lesser intensities, throughout the mountain range. There are hollows that locals will not enter. Roads that appear on old maps have since been removed from new ones, not because they no longer exist, but because one who makes maps wants to be responsible for someone following them. There are stretches of traily otherwise well-documented wilderness areas where experienced hikers report sudden, overwhelming disorientation. Not physical disorientation, not a matter of losing their sense of direction. Cognitive disorientation. A sudden and complete inability to remember where they are, why they are there, or in some cases, who they are. It passes. Generally, they find their way out. They come home, but home is different afterward. Home has sounds that were there before. Home has, occasionally, a presence at the edge of vision, a shape that retreats before it can be looked at directly, a movement in peripheral vision that stops when you turn your head. Just as the thing in the trees alongside the hollow road stopped, always, just before you could look at it fully. As if it had learned the exact extent of your peripheral vision, it was staying just outside it. As if it understood the precise distance that would keep it unseen. That kind of precision suggests intelligence. That kind of patience suggests something that has been doing this for a very long time. The folklorist, the anonymous one, says something about this in a paper she never published but shared with a small number of colleagues. She says that in her opinion, the most disturbing thing about the documented Appalachian anomalies is not the anomalies themselves, but the consistency of the behavior associated with them. The way they seem to respond to observation, the way they seem to adapt. She says, what we are documenting is not random or chaotic. Each has structure, each has pattern, and pattern implies intention. She does not say what the intention might be. She says only that in all her years of study she has not been able to find a satisfying answer to that question, in that she has largely stopped looking, because looking too hard at the particular question tends to produce a kind of vertigo that she finds difficult to recover from. There is a local saying in one of the small communities nearest to the hollow road. It is the kind of saying that gets passed through generations, the kind that sounds like a superstition until you are standing in the right place at the right time. It then sounds like something else entirely. The saying is, don't look for the hollow will find you if it needs you. The saying implies, if you follow its logic, that the hollow has needs, that each is a thing capable of needing, that each is, in some sense that we do not have good language for, something with a kind of volition, something that makes choices. Think about the way the Greer family looked at Margaret when she arrived, the sense that they had been expecting her specifically, the patience of each, the absence of surprise. Think about what each would mean for a place, or the things in a place, to have been watching the world beyond its boundaries for long enough to develop that kind of certainty, to know who would come, to be ready. Think about what each would mean for something that old, that patient, that capable of watching and waiting, till decide that each was time for someone to see each, because Margaret went looking. Yes, but the folk tale says the hollow finds you if each needs you, and Margaret was a storyteller, a researcher, someone whose entire profession was built on the idea that stories matter, that they should be told, that the world is richer for having them told. Perhaps the hollow agreed. Perhaps what lives in those mountains has been waiting for someone to carry its story out. Perhaps that is what Margaret brought home with her. Not a haunting in the conventional sense, not a ghost or a spirit or an entity in pursuit, but a story that wanted to be told, that attached itself to the only person who had come close enough and stayed long enough he had the right professional instincts to carry it. If that is true, then the story you are hearing now is exactly what it was always meant to be, is somewhere in those mountains, at the end of the hollow road, in the house with the smoke rising from the chimney, a thin, straight, unwavering column. 3 figures are listening, not alarmed, not surprised, patient, aware that what they started has now traveled far beyond the tree line, beyond the mountains, beyond any boundary that the land itself provides, aware that you have now heard it. There is something that every person who goes to certain parts of the Appalachian Mountains notices if they stay long enough. It happens usually toward evening, when the light is changing, the temperature is dropping, the sounds of the day are settling into the quieter vocabulary of dusk. It is a feeling that is very hard to describe to someone who has not experienced it, but witnesses have tried, consistently, across many decades of accounts. They describe it as the feeling of a door, not a visible door, not a physical door in any literal sense, but the sudden, visceral, unmistakable impression that you are standing at the threshold of something, that just behind the surface of what you can see, hearing, smelling, touch, there is another layer, another room, another version of the mountain that exists alongside the one you are standing in, occupying the same space, breathing the same air, but entirely invisible to your ordinary senses. In that other room, something is very much awake. Margaret Dowd felt this, she said. She felt it the moment she stepped off the main road and onto the hollow road, before she saw the house, before she saw the family, before any of the events that changed her life occurred. She felt it as soon as the tree canopy closed over her head, the sounds of traffic faded, the forest silence replaced them. She said it was like stepping through something, like crossing a line that she could not see but could absolutely feel, like the air on the other side of that line had a different texture, like it was heavier, like it was watching her back. She walked through it because she was brave, because she was professional, because she did not yet understand what it meant. Understanding came later. Understanding comes, for most people, too late. The family at the end of the hollow road is still there. That much can be confirmed. The smoke still rises from the chimney. The structures that appear on satellite imagery of the area, which are few and blowing, seem to resist the kind of sharp resolution that modern imaging technology should easily provide, and is to present. The road still exists, though it remains unsigned and largely invisible to anyone who does not already know where to look. And the silence is still there. The particular, intentional, maintained silence of a place that has learned to hold very still when the outside world comes looking. The folklorist says that in oral tradition, hollows like this one are sometimes called the watching places, not because something watches from them exactly, but because time moves differently in them, because they are somehow adjacent to something that the mountain community's ancestors understood, named and respected, and that the modern world has lost the vocabulary to discuss. She says, the old people knew that you don't approach a watching place unless you are ready to be seen. She says, the problem with the modern world is that we have forgotten how to be ready. Margaret was not ready. She will tell you that herself, if you can find her, which is not easy. She moved again, the third chimney, till somewhere that she has not disclosed. She is not hiding, she says. She is just, as she puts it, trying to reduce the radius. She means the radius of visibility, the sense that something knows where she is, that something can see her from very far away, from behind a layer of the world that she cannot access but that apparently offers a very clear view of everything on the side. She says the feeling has diminished, not gone, diminished. She says it is strongest at night, and strongest when she is in places that are very quiet, and she has, as a result, arranged her life to be around as much noise as possible. City noise, human noise, the constant reassuring static of other people existing nearby. She says it helps. She says it helps because whatever is watching seems to prefer the quiet. The oldest residents of the town nearest to the hollow road are few now, as they are everywhere. The ones who remember the most, who carry the deepest layers of local knowledge, are in their 80s and 90s, and they talk about the hollow and the family in ways that are different from how younger people in town talk about it. Younger people in town don't talk about it much at all. They have grown up in a world that does not have good structures for thinking about this kind of thing. In the absence of those structures, they tend to either dismiss it or to be frightened in an unproductive way. The old ones are neither dismissive nor unproductively frightened. They are respectful, in the deep and specific sense of our respect that has been owned by proximity and passed on through generations of careful coexistence with something they do not fully understand but have learned to live alongside. One of them, a man in his 90s who spent his entire life in those mountains and who agreed to speak to a researcher only after a great deal of chimney, in the establishment of genuine trust, said something that has stayed with everyone who heard it. He said that the hollow is not malevolent. He was careful about that. He said that attributing malevolence to it was a misunderstanding, the same kind of misunderstanding you make when you call a storm malevolent, or a flood, or any force that does not set your frame of reference for what constitutes harm. He said, it is not trying to hurt you. It is just very old and very large. It does need to think about things the way we do. It thinks on a different scale. What if you used to something that has been sitting in that valley since before there were people to sit beside it? What if one person coming up that road, standing in that yard, looking at those faces? It is barely even a moment. He said, the ones up there, the family, they he part of it. They've been there so long they've grown into the ground. That's what we used to say, grown into the ground. You can't separate them from the place anymore. They are the place, same as the trees are the place, same as the rock is the place. He said, in the place is aware. That's all. It is just aware. He was quiet for a moment after that, and then he said one mighty thing. He said, the question you should be asking is not what it wants. The question you should be asking is what it is waiting for. He said that, and then he looked out the window at the mountains in the distance, their rounded old backs rising above the tree line, their slopes dark green in the late afternoon light. He did not say anything else for a long time. Outside, the light was changing. The temperature was dropping. The sounds of the day were settling into the quieter vocabulary of dusk. And somewhere in those mountains, at the end of a road that most maps no longer show, behind the tree canopy, behind the ridge, in the valley that a surveyor found more than a century ago and wrote about in hesitant and carefully chosen language, the smoke was rising from a chimney, a thin, straight, unwavering column, pale against the darkening sky, rising without wavering, as if the air itself were holding its breath, as if the place were listening, as if each had heard that its story was being told, as if each were deciding what to do about it. The mountains are old. The hollow is older. The family at the end of the road has been there for longer than anyone can document, and they will be there when the documentation is forgotten, and they will be there when the researchers who came looking have moved away, changed their names, arranged their lives around the ambient noise of other people. They will still be there, patient in stewing watching, in the room adjacent to the one you live in the layer that lies just behind the surface of the visible world, in the quality of silence that falls over a place when something very old the siege still hold very still. You felt it, perhaps, at some point while listening to this, a stillness, a change in the texture of the air around you, a sense, brief and perhaps easily dismissed, that something had become aware of you. That is the nature of our watching place. That is what it means to hear a story like this one. The hollow has been told. The hollow knows. In somewhere in the Appalachian mountains, in a valley that does not appear on modern maps, in a house that is older than anyone can say, three figures standing in the dim interior, and listen to something that you cannot hear. They are not alarmed. They are not surprised. They have all the time in the world.